On today's show, we'll be joined by Locked On Grizzlies host DaMichael Cole for a better understanding on who Dillon Brooks is as a player and what can we expect from him with the Houston Rockets, his best and worst games as a member of the Memphis Grizzlies, what he brought to the table as far as leadership, how he made the players around him better, and how he impacted winning and was an important part of the Grizzlies culture. All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
Throw it up to Jalen Green.
Sengun here in the short roll. Oh, my, that's the no-look.
Jabari for three and the win. Yeah!
Look at Tari, Eason.
Here comes Tari.
No!
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
The Houston Rockets select Thompson and Cam Whitmore.
One thing I have never done is not made the playoffs, and so we want to take that step here as well.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Grizzlies, DaMichael Cole. You can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Grizzlies, here to help us get a better understanding of one of the newest additions to your Houston Rockets, Dillon Brooks. DaMichael, he's already a bit of a polarizing figure amongst Rockets fans. I guess that's just who Dillon Brooks is, huh?
That's the word. I literally wrote about it maybe a couple weeks ago, and that's the word I used the entire season, polarizing, because it's like flipping a coin. You're going to have those fans who say, man, we love the defensive intensity he's going to bring to the table, the energy, all of that. Then you're going to have the other side that talks about his offensive efficiency. So depends on what you value more, probably.
Okay, well, let's go ahead, and what I want to do here is hopefully have Rockets fans, through you, kind of gain a better understanding of who Dillon Brooks is, not just as a player, but as a person, and kind of what he brought to the Memphis Grizzlies all these years, having only played for one organization so far throughout his NBA career. Let's start with just how would you best describe his career as a Memphis Grizzly? Just your elevator pitch for what he brought to the Grizzlies.
It was tenacious. That would be the one word I would use to describe it. But to expound on that, basically when he got there, it's kind of similar to the situation in Houston, a little bit different because there weren't as many pieces in place when he got to Memphis. When he got to Memphis, things were starting to be torn apart. Tony Allen had already left, and this is the grit and grind era of Grizzlies, but Tony Allen was already gone. And I think Zach Randolph had already left as well. So basically, he gets there. He's playing with Mike Conley. He's playing with Marc Gasol, and they have a terrible season. I think Mike Conley misses most of the season. And then his second year with those guys, that's when the trades happen. That's when Marc Gasol's gone. Mike Conley eventually is gone as well. And I think that was Jaren's first year. And the next year is the year you get the number 2 pick in the draft. You land Ja Morant, and, the rest is history pretty much. But the tenaciousness of Dillon Brooks comes into play because a lot of people in Memphis give him credit for where the credit was due in terms of Dillon Brooks. And he is a big reason for that culture shift. When you think about the adjectives, the way that the Grizzlies are described now as a team on the outside looking in, all of those same words are more than likely words that you can use to describe Dillon Brooks. And that's because Dillon Brooks' energy, the way he carried himself, pretty much directly affected the Grizzlies. I mean, you talk about how the Grizzlies I talk about it at least. They're very stylish off the court. Got a lot of swagger to them. That's Dillon Brooks. The most obvious one that everybody likes to talk about with the Grizzlies is the trash talk. Well, I don't have to tell you, Dillon Brooks is probably one of the better trash talkers in the NBA at this point. So all of that kind of carried over to the Grizzlies, but the defensive intensity, he talked a lot about, getting some of those guys more willing to do the dirty work. I think that's what he's going to do with a guy like Jalen Green, right? He's one of those guys. He's going to speak up when you can go in there and crash the boards against those 250-pound guys, but instead you stop, or you can dive for that loose ball. Dillon is going to be that guy that can speak out on those certain situations. But he brought that tenacity to Memphis, tenaciousness, and it kind of was infectious throughout his whole tenure in Memphis with the rest of the team.
You talk about him being kind of that culture setter, that tone setter, establishing what, a lot of people associate with the Grizzlies as far as their culture, their identity. Do you have any examples of like moments where you can point to his leadership, kind of coaching up Ja, Triple J, other young guys on the roster and showing them, hey, this is what needs to be done for us to be the team that we want to be?
Yeah, a couple. Maybe stories more so than moments, but there are so many that comes to mind. For one, the value of Dillon Brooks' word, in the locker room. One thing that the players, no matter which player you ask, they would call Dillon Brooks the heart and soul of the team. As recently as last year, even a couple years ago, when players talked about the Grizzlies, John Morant, Desmond Bane, they say, man, Dillon's the heart and soul. That's how they referred to him. David Roddy this past year, I think, I wrote about it a little bit, but David Roddy was a rookie who, if you look at him play, his role was similar to what the Grizzlies wanted to get out of Dillon Brooks, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later. But David Roddy would come in the game and replace Dillon Brooks and play this defensive role. It got to the point we started to see Dillon would take Roddy under his wing, teach him all these little small details, on the defensive end. And then how about the film room, right? Grizzlies players don't usually get to take control in the film room like that. Usually it's Taylor Jenkins, it's Darko Rajakovic when he was there as the lead assistant, or one of the other assistant coaches. But the one player that the Grizzlies would let take control from time to time was Dillon Brooks. There were times where Taylor Jenkins would say, Dillon, you got the floor. How can we correct this on the defensive end? Where do we correct this on the defensive end? His attention to detail on defense stood out a lot. I'm sure he's talked about it already to the Houston media about how he will pick up on play calls and relay it to his teammates. Our seats inside the FedEx Forum are very close. This is something we saw a lot. He would point to Ja, say Ja. He'd let him know exactly what's coming, and lo and behold, a lot of times exactly that would happen. So it's those little small things, where that's how you shift the culture, because other players pick up on that. There eventually, through last season, I remember there was one play against the New Orleans Pelicans where Ja basically had his head turned to the inbound pass, and as soon as the pass was thrown, he turns around, jumps in the air, catches the ball out of the air, and goes the other way and scores 2 points. And we were like, Ja, how in the world did you know that was about to happen? He was like, well, I knew that play was coming. And again, it's Ja's a really smart player himself, but it goes to that culture being set where Dillon is, he is a film room freak, for lack of better words. And that is something that could be infectious throughout that Houston locker room.
Coming up, what can we expect for Dillon Brooks' on-the-court impact, his roles both offensively and defensively, as well as just some of his best and worst performances from last season to get a better understanding of who he is as a player? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season's about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. That's right, all season long, because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every single time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every single victory along the way. Right now, we can take a look at Super Bowl 58 outright betting favorites. Kansas City Chiefs at plus 600, the Philadelphia Eagles at plus 800, and then rounding up the top five, you have the Buffalo Bills, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the San Francisco 49ers, all at plus 1,000 points a piece. So you pick any one of those five teams, or further down the list, if you want to pick the Texans, by all means, go for it. Every single win that they get in the regular season, you can use those bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets with DaMichael Cole, host of Locked On Grizzlies, getting a better understanding of who Dillon Brooks is and what we can expect out of him in a Rockets jersey. Now, DaMichael, we've talked, and I appreciate the insight that you've given us so far just about what Dillon Brooks kind of brings to the table as far as some of the off-the-court stuff. What can we expect out of his on-the-court presence? We know just on the surface, he's a defensive guy. There's some question marks maybe about what he brings to the table offensively. Let's start with the defense and how he impacts the game on that floor, or on that side of the floor, I should say.
He wants the top matchup every single night. And from an impact standpoint, if you're looking for a guy who is a disruptor from one of those guys who, a Jaden McDaniels or Herb Jones, the guys with the long arms, they get all deflections, they get all the steals and things like that. It's not Dillon Brooks. You're probably going to see him this season. He's probably going to average less than a steal a game. It's not going to take a lot of charges. None of that is his defensive profile. His defensive profile is straight up get in your face. Yeah, I'm going to foul you a little bit because physicality is his name of the game. I remember one time, since I'm telling Dillon Brooks stories within the stories here, it was when Zion Williamson, you remember early last season, Zion was just unstoppable.
Yeah.
And at one point, D'Angelo Russell basically said, this is when he played with the Timberwolves, he said that, well, we can't stop Zion because they're basically letting him play football out there. And it was, it was one of those money quotes. People were picking up on it and talking about it for a while. Well, Zion's next game was against the Grizzlies. So I go up to Dillon Brooks before the game because I know Dillon Brooks is the guy to talk to about these type things. I'm like, well, they said it's like playing football against this guy. And you know what Dillon Brooks said? He didn't take the normal route where you hear some players will try to, edge the refs on to maybe, being attentive of his playing style and say, oh, Zion, yeah, he's very, very physical out there and all that. Dillon said, well, I play football too on the court. And that was Dillon Brooks' response. I play football too. And he's not lying because if you look at Dillon Brooks' defensive stats over the years, fouls per game, he will be in the top 10, top 20 pretty much every year that he plays in the league. But you know what? He's very aggressive. He doesn't tone that aggressiveness down, and it works against a lot of guys. He is very effective against Steph Curry. You look at the numbers, you look at his matchup against Steph Curry, and one of his viral moments was saying, he told Steph, he said, you can't take me one-on-one. And it sounds crazy. But if you watch that game, anytime Steph was able to get any breathing room, he had to get that created for him via screens and things like that. He couldn't score on Dillon one-on-one. Dillon blocked his shot, knocked it out of bounds, all type of disruptiveness. So as a one-on-one defender, he gets after it. He wants that matchup, whether it's a guard. And again, touching on the Zion standpoint, that game was Zion's worst game of the season. Lo and behold, I think he had 7-8 turnovers. Dillon was his primary defender, which was weird because the Grizzlies got Jaren Jackson Jr., right? Well, they matched him up against Dillon against Zion, and Zion brought the physicality to him, and Dillon, he embraces it. He's one of those guys when you knock him back, he kind of smiles, not on the court, but in his head, you can feel it. You can yeah, I like this. Like he is all about physicality. That's Dillon Brooks' game on defense. He's not a disruptor from the standpoint of he's going to get in the passing lanes and get you these steals and go the other way and get you 2 points. That's why when you look at the advanced stats favor those type of guys, right? That's why Jaren Jackson Jr., when you think about stocks, guys who can get blocks, steals, these disruptors, the front court guys who get a lot of blocks, the advanced stats are going to favor those guys. They're not really going to favor a guy who he's not getting a bunch of steals. He's not that's not his style. He's just going to slide his feet, and he's going to make it uncomfortable for you. He's going to make you want to pass to your teammate, and that's why stats like defensive field goal percentage, that's where Dillon Brooks stands out, because at the end of the day, the guy guarding him is going to have – the guy he's guarding is going to have a lesser scoring night, even though the advanced stats sometimes don't favor him because he's not creating steals, he's not creating a lot of turnovers and things like that.
Dillon Brooks definitely, to me, it just, on the outside looking in, screams the type of guy that matches like the eye test, right? You watch him, you're like, okay, he's a hell of a defender, even if the advanced stats aren't necessarily backing up that point. I am curious your thoughts though, DaMichael. When you go back to this past season, I don't have the numbers ready on hand, but there was, for the last 3-4 years, at least as far as I was digging back, every lineup that Dillon Brooks was on the court with, or when Dillon Brooks was on the court, he had a positive plus minus, right? He was an impactful winning player when he was on the court. But then this past year in the playoffs specifically, Dillon had a negative, a really bad net rating in the playoffs. What was it about this last stint that was so rough around the edges for Dillon?
Well, I think opponents start being more disrespectful, for lack of a better word. I remember it was January. It was January this past season. They were playing against Golden State. This was the first time that it really just caught my eye. And of course, it had to be against Golden State because I think Golden State was being disrespectful purposely. But the league actually caught on after this. This was the first time I had noticed a team had basically said, the three-pointer's yours. We're going to leave you wide open. In the past, teams were more respectful because Dillon Brooks can knock down the three-pointer. He's just not going to knock them down a lot in bunches. So at least the uncontested ones. But the thing is, Golden State basically was guarding him from the top of the key and maybe a couple more feet in, close to the free throw line. They were giving him the three-point shot. That was the first time I had really seen that. And it got to the point, when you think about it, a team like the Grizzlies, having that, guys sag off of Dillon Brooks hurts Ja Morant's ability to drive to the basket and things like that. So it puts more pressure on Desmond Bane and things like that. So there was kind of, a ripple effect. And Golden State did it early. There were a couple more teams that did it. But it wasn't until the playoffs where the Lakers just said, to heck with it. If he makes a shot, he makes it. If he doesn't, good for us. And they just disrespected him. Like, I remember talking to Taylor Jenkins, game 2, game 3 of that series. And I think it was game 3, after game 3, going into game 4. And I was like, look, we haven't seen a team that just straight up guarded Dillon Brooks like this over the course of a period of games. And the Grizzlies, they wanted Dillon Brooks on the floor because of the defense, a guy you could throw in front of LeBron, in front of Anthony Davis in stretches, in front of D'Angelo Russell. Like, they needed his defense on the floor because Desmond Bane is a decent defender, but he's not an elite defender. And Ja Morant is not, is below league average. So you need a top-tier defender on the floor, and Dillon Brooks is that. But the problem was, offensively, teams were the Lakers just disrespected him to the point where we started having the discussion if the Grizzlies would just say, hey, look, if we got to put Luke Kennard on the floor and Desmond Bane to have one of those guys guard LeBron James, it might be worth it at this point because of the fact that basically they just sagged off of him and he started turning down shots. It kind of got into his head a little bit because Dillon Brooks, if you go back to college, if you go back to his early years with the Grizzlies, even playing with the Canadian national team in his career, he's always been one of the top scorers everywhere he's been. So this was the first time it's like, we don't care about your offense. We don't believe in what you can bring to the table on the offensive end. And there was a psych to it, but more than anything, it hurt the Grizzlies because the paint was just crowded at this point. Memphis tried to do other things. They had him set off-ball screens. It looked weird because Dillon Brooks is never a guy that's setting off-the-ball screens. But they tried to get him involved in other ways, but it just was too much of a hurdle. So I'm pretty sure now that he's in Houston and that started during the Lakers series, you're going to see more of that. You're going to see more teams be aggressive with that. Quite frankly, he's just going to have to knock them down so teams can stop doing it.
What's crazy is, right, we know the defensive impact that he can bring to the table, right? All NBA caliber defender. Yep. And what I think the major concern is, at what point does the defense not outweigh any of the limitations offensively? You bring up the shooting. It was funny. We were looking at via the synergy stats the other day on a different episode that at least on quote unquote wide open threes, he was actually shooting 40%. It was just his off the dribble threes and his pull up threes and just kind of all the other threes that were mixed into that bag is what kind of tanked his percentage. So I'm just curious, when you look at what Dillon's role was offensively for the Grizzlies, he averaged a lot of shot attempts, probably a lot more than anybody thinks that he deserves in any system. What was the reasoning behind that? Was that encouraged by Taylor Jenkins? Was it something that he just did because that's how he's always played in his career? What was the reasoning for the volume of shot attempts that he was getting?
Well, NBA players have egos. We got to start there.
There we go. Okay.
The NBA is a very egotistic sport because a lot of these guys were the best player in their state, the best player on their team, the best player in their program in college, all the way up until you get to the league. And all of a sudden you're near the bottom of the roster or you're not the best player anymore, especially in the entire NBA. But I say that just to say, with Dillon Brooks, when he first came to the league and he first played with the Grizzlies, there was no Jaren. There was no Ja in his rookie year. And there was a Jaren his second year, but Jaren was a rookie that year. And basically, Mike Conley and Gasol, as I said earlier, they were on the way out. He had the keys. Get your shots up, Dillon. And by all means, he got his shots up. And, there was more, if you look at his, field goal percentage numbers and things like that, his first couple years, they were better than last year. They were better than this past season. But what happened this past year is, again, there's a psych to all of this. And this was the year the Grizzlies basically told Dillon Brooks, your role has to be different. And this year there were more spot-up shots, as you mentioned earlier. There were more, spot-up three-point shots and things like that. But then that led to, at the end of the year, Dillon Brooks basically saying, for lack of better words, that's not his game. He's not, a 3-and-D guy. During the season, there were high points where it looked like, okay, maybe this could work. He had a game, I think it was against the Hawks, where he played the 3-and-D role. He knocked down a couple spot-up three-point attempts, played his defense, didn't take too many shots. From March to the end of the season, the shot attempts went down for Dillon Brooks. The scoring went down, and it was noticeable for sure. But at the end of the day, it wasn't his preferred role. I always say this about Dillon Brooks in terms of him as being a shot creator. Dillon Brooks is a shot creator in my mind. He can get – if you say, hey, Dillon Brooks, go get to the mid-range right now and shoot a shot from that spot. He can get to that spot. He can get that shot. The question is if it's going to go in or not. So that's the question. He can create shots.
He's a shot creator. He's just not a shot maker.
It's the making is the hard part. It's seriously, I mean, that's a skill to me. That's a skill because if you watch him in Oregon in college, he's a shot creator. He gets to his spots. He has the turnaround. He has the mid-range shot. The question is if he's going to make it. A lot of guys, you say, hey, get to that spot. You put a certain defender in front of them. They're not getting to that spot. Dillon can get to that spot. It's just if he's going to make it or not. So in his mind, the fact that he can get to those spots, and if that ball rolls in and out, I'm going to take it again. And I'm going to take it again. So the confidence is there with Dillon Brooks. That's why I said it's a psych to it, because this was the first time when I seen Dillon Brooks passing up open shots. It's like, man, we haven't seen this in 7 years. Where's this coming from? Dillon Brooks passing up a shot, an open shot, a quality shot. But at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. He can create the shots. Whether he makes them is different. Again, he said the Grizzlies didn't call enough plays for him towards the end of the season. And if you looked at it, yeah, it was pretty much everything was for Ja, Jaren, and Dez. Pick and roll. And Dillon's role was basically spot-up shooter. And, you take it off the dribble, do your mid-range shooting, whatever. They weren't calling, pick and rolls for him, or it wasn't a lot of, plays called for him. Basically, the only time that Dillon would be put in those situations is when one of those guys were hurt. And if any game that Ja or Dez missed, we would call it the Dillon Brooks thrill game because the shot attempts would go up drastically. If you go back to the playoffs a couple years ago against the Warriors, when Ja got hurt in Game 4, go look at the Game 5 and Game 6 shot attempts. You'll see Dillon Brooks shooting way more shots than Jaren and Dez.
Man, I coming up, I want to get into the comparison that Dillon Brooks made himself between this young Rockets core and the young Grizzlies core from a few years ago while they were on the come up, as well as we'll get to his best and worst games from this past season in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets. Now, DaMichael, you mentioned earlier that we might have already heard Dillon kind of talking about some of the things that he brings to the table. We've only gotten the chance to talk to Dillon once so far as Rockets media. We didn't get an introductory press conference for him or Fred VanVleet. We got to talk to both of these guys for about 5 minutes apiece each in Vegas during Summer League, and that was it. So we got like a very early preliminary taste of what these guys are going to be like as far as just their personalities and what they bring to the table. But Dillon did mention in that very brief little interview that we got, I asked him about how he felt his role with the Grizzlies actually prepared him for this next opportunity with the Rockets. And he highlighted the fact that he sees a lot of similarities between, a young Triple J, a young Ja, to a young Jabari Smith Jr., a young Jalen Green. Yep. How do you expect his lessons that he's learned with the Grizzlies to translate to this young Rockets team?
Well, he's going to bring some discipline. From outside looking in, you would hear things, with Silas not really having full control of the young team over there and things like that. You bring in a Fred VanVleet, who's a vocal guy, but Dillon is a vocal guy too. And again, the team in Memphis called him the heart and soul. So I can see him, saying, Jalen Green, you need to play more defense, or saying, Jabari, take a better shot than them. You could have got that shot here instead of there. He can be that guy that's going to hold those guys accountable, and he's honest. He's very honest. He's not only honest to his teammates, he's honest to the media. And I remember this past season, asking a bunch of guys on the team. I asked Tyus Jones, do you think Jaren Jackson Jr. knows how dominant he can be yet? This was amidst one of his best stretches. And Tyus was like, yeah, I think he's figuring it out. And then I go up to Dillon. So you think Jaren knows how dominant he can be yet? No, he doesn't. And he's figuring he was so instrumental in Jaren Jackson Jr.'s development, because he's the guy when Jaren has those mismatches and he's trying to run out to the perimeter, he's saying, no, get down there so we can get you the ball. He made it a focal point. That's probably the one thing that I haven't mentioned that's probably going to surprise some people is he wants to be a better playmaker. Before this season started, I think he told me he wanted to average 3.5 assists, it was 4 to 5 assists per game, somewhere around there. He really emphasized becoming a better playmaker. He wants to get the ball to Jaren more. In the past, he said, we got to get the ball to Jaren. We got to get the ball to Jaren. He's going to bring that mentality. People are saying, oh, he's going to take away shots from Jalen Green. He's going to take away shots from Jabari and that whole thing. Well, in a way, yeah, he probably is. He's going to take a couple shots because Dillon Brooks thinks that Dillon Brooks can average 20 points in the NBA. But at the same time, the good about Dillon Brooks is he's going to say, Jalen, go get it. Go get after it. He's the one guy who he would always say how good Ja Morant could be. He always would say how good Jaren Jackson could be. So he's going to install that confidence in those guys. And, he's going to understand that, hey, this team is built, around those dudes.
I'm so just trying to envision what his role is going to look like for this team, right? I've kind of chalked it up to, Dillon's role to be successful with the Rockets, it needs to be a reduced role. He needs to be a 3-and-D guy. He needs to just accept, the fact that he is going to bring the defensive intensity, and then offensively he needs to minimize his game. But in listening to some of the stuff that you shared, I have my concerns about him wanting to get too many shots up offensively, right? Taking shots away from the other guys. But at the same time, what you just mentioned, right? That unselfish attitude, right? The idea of wanting other guys to be successful. I wonder if there's a way to kind of blend those two things together where he feels like he has a bigger role offensively than maybe he did at the tail end with the Grizzlies, but without necessarily the added shot volume, if that makes sense. Maybe because Ime Udoka's talked about a lot, he wants an unselfish team. He wants a team that shares the basketball, that, passes up good shots for great shots, guys that are always looking for the next right read. And maybe there's a way for Dillon to feel more offensively involved if everybody's sharing the ball rather than, and this isn't a knock on what the Grizzlies do, but a lot of the action runs through Ja, right? A lot of the action runs through Ja, and there's a lot of heavy pick and roll action between him and Desmond and Triple J and all that. And that probably left Dillon feeling excluded at times. So I do wonder if there's a world, what does that look like for Dillon to be successful in that role? And that could actually be really good.
Yeah, the thing about it is now over there you have a guy like Fred VanVleet who is very good off the ball, just like he is on the ball. He's a very good spot-up shooter. And that's how he thrived in Toronto in certain situations when they would have him and Kyle Lowry on the floor together, and Kyle Lowry would be the primary ball handler, and Fred VanVleet would still be effective. We see, I think that can work for Jalen Green as well. So I could see there being situations against certain teams where the ball can be put in Dillon Brooks' hands, and you put him in a pick and roll situation, and you show him that love, right? Show him, hey, look, we know you can create a little bit. Let's put you in certain situations against certain teams to be effective, in those moments. And I think Dillon Brooks can do that. I think there is a route for that happening. But going back to your point, him being this 3-and-D's just spot up and play defense guy. Maybe the money makes him happy in that role.
Right. There's 86 million reasons why he might, be able to accept that role.
86 million reasons, right? But outside of those 86 million reasons, there's probably a bunch of million more reasons why he's not going to like that, because everything towards the tail end of Memphis, again, this was hardly a problem during the season. He would talk about it from the standpoint of, I'm just sacrificing for my team and things like that. But at the end of the season, when the season was over, he basically said, look, that's not my role. That's not who I am. And if we're being honest, that's not who Dillon Brooks is. Dillon Brooks is again, when he is able to get to his spots and things like that, he can create a little bit. And he was one of the Grizzlies players who could get to the free throw line a little bit and things like that. The Grizzlies didn't have a lot of guys who were very effective at getting to the free throw line. Dillon Brooks is one of those guys. It'll look, a little funky at times, but he gets the job done. So with that being said, I feel like, you can put him in some actions, give him the ball a little bit, but just to the understanding of, Jalen Green's going to get more shots. Fred VanVleet might get more shots, and whoever else you think, maybe Jabari Smith or whoever else in that offense should get more shots than him. He's still probably, I don't see Dillon Brooks taking less than 12 shots a game, but still, I feel like there is a route for him taking less than 15 or 16.
When you look back on this past season, because I know we got plenty of years to pick from, but we'll stay focused on just this past season. I know you highlighted a couple different games, a couple different moments throughout this past year that stood out to you. If you had to think about maybe one or two games of his best performances and maybe one or two games of his worst performances for maybe Rockets fans to go back and check out so they can get a better feel for him, what would you suggest they go look into?
Man, it was a thrill covering this guy, Jackson. I mean,
I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. I'm ready for it.
So let me give you a stat, by the way. And I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but relatively speaking here, this is kind of how it went last year. When Dillon Brooks, this is kind of how good he was on defense. When Dillon Brooks shot 50% from the field, the Grizzlies were I think it was 18-2 last season. And it was somewhere around, the second loss didn't come until very end of the season, but pretty much they were 18-1 for the most part of the season. That one loss was against the Utah Jazz when the Jazz made 20-something three-pointers, and it was by 1 point. 1 point loss when the Jazz made 20 three-pointers. But not only did they win those games, 18 games, 17 of them were by double digits. When Dillon Brooks is effective from the field, the Grizzlies blow the roof off of teams. It wasn't even close. But getting back to your point, that Jazz game actually was one of his better games of the year. I think he shot 12 of 20 in that game. And again, it's always those games where Ja Dez doesn't play. He ends up getting a bigger role in the offense and things like that, and he kind of goes off. But if you're looking for games that they won, a couple games come to mind against the Hornets, against Golden State. I know people like the Grizzlies Golden State thing. He had an 18-point game against Golden State where he was super effective. But I got the numbers right here by me. If I'm looking at the games, here's it. When Dillon Brooks shot 50% from the field, they beat the Phoenix Suns by 25 points. They beat Golden State by 14. They beat Charlotte by 31. They lost to the Jazz by 1 point, 123 to 122. they lost to the Pelicans, again, going to the one that was at the end of the season. It was April 5th. By the way, all the other starters pretty much set out this game. So that was one of those throwaway games. They lost to the Pelicans by 7. But if you go to the regular season games that matter, beat Houston by 37, beat Denver by 18, Atlanta by 25, beat the Pelicans by 21, Minnesota by 11. The Knicks by 4 is the only other one that was single digits. Beat Milwaukee by 41, beat Toronto by 13, and beat Phoenix by 30. If he shoots 50%, there's a good chance that the team is going to win. Now, getting to your point, the ugly side. The reason, at the end of the day, we just mentioned a slew of games where the Grizzlies were successful when he shot 50%. But if you were thinking from the glass half empty perspective, it wasn't a lot of games. It was around 20 games, but regular season is 80-plus games, 82 games. He had a lot of games. He had 4 games last season where he shot below 20% from the field. And guess what? The Grizzlies won all 4 of those. So sometimes the stuff just doesn't make sense. But at the same time, Dillon Brooks was routinely shooting in the 30s in percent. And it was a lot of impactful games. Again, against the Lakers. They played the Lakers on January 20th. You'll remember this game because it was the Shannon Sharpe game. This was the Shannon Sharpe game. And Dillon Brooks, if you want to see one of his uglier performances, that was one of them. That was a game he actually got into it with Shannon Sharpe. I think he shot 4 of 17 from the field that game, missed a lot of big shots, and they lost by 1 point. So it was one of those games. It's like, Dillon, if you shot better, the Grizzlies would have won that game. And there were other games. The Grizzlies lost against the Washington Wizards, early season game on the road. This is when Memphis was struggling on the road. Shot 7 of 22 from the field. Again, you're wondering why he took so many shots? Well, again, because Jaren Jackson Jr., this was at the point of the season where he wasn't back yet. So if one of your top players, if Jalen Green misses a game, if Jabari misses a game, Fred VanVleet, get ready. Because Dillon Brooks, that antenna goes on where it's my time to shine. But that's why we talk about what type of role is him being a role player. And I think the ideal role, as we were just talking about a little bit earlier, is getting him those shots, but it's getting him the shots that he wants. It's not necessarily just saying, hey, go stand in the corner. If you get him the shots that he wants and it's not a extreme high value, as long as he's able to shoot 45%, 48%, 50%, you're going to have a good chance at winning.
I got one more loaded question for you, DaMichael, before we let you get out of here.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of Grizzlies fans who are honestly upset, right? They're going to miss Dillon Brooks, right? And what he brought to this team. Are the Grizzlies a better team without Dillon Brooks? There's a reason they let him go.
Yeah, I think so. There is some addition by subtraction there from the Grizzlies' perspective, because at the end of the day, the Grizzlies had a situation where now Ja, Jaren, and Dez, as they get closer to their prime years, they will get more shots. There's not a player who's going to come in the lineup and get those shots that Dillon. There's not a set starter at small forward who's going to come get 16 shots. You're not expecting Marcus Smart to take that many shots, and quite frankly, he won't take that many shots. And those second-year guys aren't going to do that either. Luke Kennard is the one guy who's probably going to get more shots now, and any team in the league would want Luke Kennard getting more shots. So that's more understandable. So there is some addition by subtraction there, especially since the Grizzlies prioritized getting another wing defender to replace him, and they got Marcus Smart. Now, if you don't go out and get Marcus Smart, we have a different conversation, because now there's a big leak in the defense. But the fact that the Grizzlies address the defensive concerns, Marcus Smart isn't going to take as many shots. He's not trying to, create as many shots as Dillon Brooks. There's some addition by subtraction, because now there's some belief that Desmond Bane, he averaged 21 last year. He could probably average 23, 24 now. And John Morant will get the ball, now. And when he's going to the rim, he doesn't have to worry about a small forward or another wing guy coming from behind him, knocking the ball away in certain situations. Because if it's Dez and Luke out there, you're not leaving either one of those guys. Or if it's Marcus Smart, he's not scared to take the big shots. It doesn't make them at a high clip, but he's going to knock down a few. So I think there is some addition by subtraction with losing Dillon Brooks. Again, you talked about the net rating numbers and things like that. For pretty much all the way up until this past season, he was a net positive. Even this past season, in the early season, he was a net positive. But once the book got out, once Golden State, the Lakers, a couple other teams started to leave him open on the offensive end and basically dared him to win the game, things changed.
DaMichael, thank you so much for taking the time to come join us on the show and really give us a lot of amazing insight into what the Rockets can expect out of Dillon Brooks this upcoming season. Do us all a favor. Let everybody know where they can track you down at.
Man, I'm some of everywhere out here. For all the Locked On fans, you can go find me right over at Locked On Grizzlies as well. Me and Joe Mullinax 3 days a week now at this part of the offseason, having all these type of conversations about everything that's going on around the Grizzlies. And, we still talk a little Dillon Brooks a little bit over there. So you can come tune into that as well if you want to hear us expound on the hole that's left without Dillon Brooks. But also at the Commercial Appeal, that's where all my written work is done. You can find my work in my Twitter account at DaMichael C. And that's just my name with the letter C. And then you can also go find me again with the Locked On Network. That's everywhere you can find me. You know where you can find your Locked On podcast. Find Locked On Grizzlies in those same places as well. And then commercialappeal.com. That's where you can find my Grizzlies content.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.